there comes a moment in life when the noise finally fades. The constant opinions, the expectations, the need to explain yourself, to prove yourself, to perform for approval, all of it begins to fall away. And when it does, the silence can feel uncomfortable, even frightening. Because for the first time, you are alone with your own thoughts, your own truth, your own heart. That silence feels like loneliness, but in reality, it is the doorway to peace. Most people confuse peace with happiness. They think peace should feel exciting, full, loud, and validating. But real peace is quiet. It doesn't clap for you. It doesn't rush to reassure you. It simply sits with you and asks, "Are you finally ready to listen?" And when you first step into it, you might miss the chaos. You might miss the drama. You might miss being needed, being pulled, being constantly distracted. Because chaos feels familiar even when it hurts. Peace begins the moment you stop explaining yourself to people who were never trying to understand you in the first place. For so long, many of us live as if our worth depends on how well we justify our choices, our boundaries, our growth, and even our silence. We rehearse answers in our minds, preparing defenses for decisions that already feel right in our hearts. This constant need to explain slowly drains your energy because it places your inner authority in someone else's hands. You begin to measure your truth by how acceptable it sounds to others, and that is where peace starts to slip away. When you stop explaining yourself, it doesn't mean you become rude, distant, or careless. It means you recognize that clarity does not require permission. Not everyone deserves access to your reasoning, your wounds, or your vision. Some people listen only to respond, to judge, or to control, and explaining yourself to them only deepens frustration. Silence, in this sense, becomes an act of self-respect. It is you deciding that your time and emotional energy are valuable, not endlessly available for validation. Explaining yourself often comes from fear. The fear of being misunderstood, disliked, or abandoned. But the truth is, those who are committed to misunderstanding you will do so no matter how clearly you speak. Peace grows when you accept this reality and stop exhausting yourself trying to manage other people's perceptions. You realize that being misunderstood by the wrong people is far less damaging than betraying yourself to be accepted. This shift is uncomfortable at first because it breaks old patterns of people pleasing, but it is also deeply freeing. When you no longer explain, you begin to act with quiet confidence. Your decisions become rooted in alignment rather than approval. You don't feel the urge to justify your boundaries or apologize for prioritizing your well-being. You understand that your no does not need a paragraph and your yes does not need an audience. This inner steadiness changes the way you move through life. You become less reactive, less defensive, and more intentional. There is power in letting people think what they want. It trains you to trust yourself instead of external noise. You stop oversharing your plans and start protecting your vision. You stop arguing with opinions that do not shape your future. This is where peace quietly settles in, not as excitement, but as relief. Relief from the need to perform, to convince, to seek reassurance. Your mind becomes calmer because it is no longer running constant simulations of how to be accepted. Over time, this practice sharpens your intuition. You become more aware of when speaking adds value and when silence preserves strength. You learn that peace does not come from being understood by everyone, but from being honest with yourself. And as you stand firmly in that truth, the need to explain fades naturally, replaced by a grounded sense of self that does not require applause, agreement, or constant reassurance. Loneliness often arrives disguised as loss, making you believe that something has gone wrong in your life. When people drift away after you choose peace, it can feel like rejection, as if you were not enough to be kept. But in reality, loneliness is alignment taking shape. It appears when you stop forcing connections that no longer match your values, your growth, or your emotional maturity. The silence that follows is not punishment, it is space being created for clarity. As you step into this phase, you may notice how quiet your world becomes. Conversations that once filled your days disappear. Familiar faces fade into distance. This can be deeply unsettling because humans are wired to associate presence with safety. Yet many of those connections were sustained by habit, convenience, or shared chaos rather than genuine understanding. When you remove yourself from environments that thrive on confusion or emotional dependency, loneliness is the natural echo left behind. This solitude confronts you with yourself in ways distraction never allowed. Without constant external voices shaping your thoughts, you begin to hear your own. You recognize how much of your energy was spent adjusting, tolerating, and shrinking to maintain connections. Loneliness exposes the truth of those compromises. It teaches you that being surrounded by people does not guarantee connection, and being alone does not automatically mean emptiness. Alignment requires separation. Growth often demands distance from those who benefit from your old version. When you start setting boundaries, speaking less, and choosing calm over reaction, not everyone can follow. Some people are attached to the role you played in their lives, not to who you are becoming. Their absence can hurt, but it also confirms that your growth is real. Loneliness becomes evidence that you are no longer available for dynamics that drain you. In this quiet phase, your standards begin to shift. You stop craving attention and start valuing intention. You become selective with your time because you finally understand its worth. Loneliness sharpens discernment. You learn to recognize the difference between connection that nourishes and connection that merely distracts. This awareness reshapes your relationships moving forward, making them fewer but deeper, quieter but more authentic. There is also a strength built in this isolation. When you learn to sit with yourself without escaping into noise, you develop emotional independence. You no longer rely on constant validation to feel secure. You become your own anchor. This inner stability transforms loneliness into self-trust. You realize you can face discomfort without abandoning yourself, and that realization is empowering. Loneliness does not last forever, but its lessons do. It prepares you to meet people without desperation and to build connections without fear of being alone. It strips away illusions and leaves you with truth. As alignment deepens, the emptiness you once feared begins to feel like peace. The silence becomes familiar, even comforting. And in that space, you start attracting people and opportunities that resonate with who you truly are, not who you pretended to be. Choosing peace often feels like making the most difficult decision in the moment, because it asks you to give up what is familiar before it gives you anything in return. Peace demands boundaries where there were none, honesty where silence once felt safer, and courage where avoidance used to protect you. At first, it feels expensive. You may lose access to certain people, routines, and comforts that once made life feel full, even if they were quietly draining you. Letting go can feel like failure when you have been taught that endurance is strength and tolerance is maturity. Chaos, on the other hand, rarely feels costly at the beginning. It disguises itself as excitement, passion, or productivity. It keeps you busy enough to avoid reflection and loud enough to drown out your intuition. But over time, chaos begins to charge interest. It takes your sleep, your focus, and your emotional stability. It pulls you into constant reaction mode, where every decision is rushed and every emotion feels amplified. You may not notice the cost immediately, but it shows up as exhaustion, confusion, and a persistent sense of being behind in your own life. Peace requires you to say no when it would be easier to say yes. It asks you to disappoint others so you can stop disappointing yourself. This can feel selfish at first because you are stepping out of roles that defined you for years. You might feel guilt for choosing distance, for prioritizing rest, for refusing to engage in unnecessary conflict. But guilt is often just a sign that you are breaking patterns that once kept you stuck. The discomfort of choosing peace is temporary, but the consequences of choosing chaos compound over time. When you live in chaos, even small decisions become heavy. Your mind is constantly overloaded, replaying conversations, anticipating problems, and managing emotional turbulence. There is no space to think clearly or move intentionally. Peace simplifies your inner world. It gives you room to breathe, to observe, to respond instead of react. That clarity becomes a form of wealth, allowing you to make better choices, not just emotionally, but mentally and spiritually. Paying the price of peace also reshapes your self-respect. Each boundary you uphold strengthens your sense of identity. Each moment you choose calm over confrontation builds trust within yourself. You begin to realize that peace is not passive, it is disciplined. It requires consistency and self-awareness. Chaos asks nothing of you but your energy, and once it has taken enough, it leaves you empty and unsure of how you got there. Over time, the return on peace becomes undeniable. Your nervous system settles. Your thoughts become clearer. Your emotions stop swinging between extremes. Life may look quieter from the outside, but it feels stronger on the inside. The initial cost fades as stability grows, and what once felt like sacrifice reveals itself as investment. You see clearly that while peace asked you to let go, chaos would have taken everything without asking.